Good evening. I just wanted to follow up on the Norma Foley video that I made a few days ago, because there was a couple of things that escaped my mind as I was doing it. I had them down in front of me, but I forgot to put them in. And one of them is in relation to the types of children who are, we'll say, picked or selected to be abused. Kids that tend to be abused, right? They tend to be children that are most vulnerable. And what does that mean? It means children who may only have one parent, whose parents, if they have both, don't seem to be too involved in their child's life. They might be working all the time, or they could be at X, Y, and Z, or whatever, but they're not overly involved in the child's life, right? So the child might walk home from school alone, that sort of a thing. Never seems to have anybody looking out for him or collecting him or her, right? So it's the vulnerable children, which also kind of dovetails with poorer children, children who don't have the means, right, or whose parents don't have the means. So you have vulnerable children who may not have the parental or adult guidance that they need in their life, which all children need, all children crave, okay? And then you have, I suppose, maybe a surrogate relationship coming from a teacher or another adult, which a child will like, because all children like when adults take interest in them. And I'm not talking about negative interest, I'm talking about positive interest, right? It feels good to a child to be spoken of highly or encouraged or cared about, right? It's natural. It's natural to feel like that. So what we've seen in the report is that a lot of these children, they were confused around the abuse because there was obviously grooming involved in it. And grooming then is artificially creating an overly positive feeling or sentiment in the child's mind in regard to the abuser before the abuse happens, okay? So the child believes that that person's invested in them, therefore the child is invested in them too, right? So there's a bond there, as sick as it is, right? But there's a bond there. And a lot of children, not just from reading the report, but from working with adults who were abused as children as well, they speak of that, the confusion around the abuse, that there's elements of the relationship, the grooming, that they enjoy, because you tend to have children who are deprived of attention and deprived of encouragement, and now they're getting it in abundance, okay, and it feels good, but there's a price to pay for that, okay? That's my point on this. So next we have, I use that to sort of segue into what this government is promoting in regards to the education of children around sex, what would have been sex education, right? And a lot of the pressure that was put on the former curriculum or around the former curriculum was that it was too biologically based, which kind of flies in the face of the arguments for this stuff, because they say they want to have children that are educated, that have the words to be able to speak about that should abuse ever occur. They would have the words to be able to express themselves and to be able to tell somebody that this has happened to them. So is the biological phrasing and is the biological know-how and knowledge of the act of sex, is that not enough? It was argued that it wasn't, and the new curriculum would need to be more inclusive of what exactly? Ideology, okay, worldview, and the inner feelings or the inner self-concept of the children, and how that comes in such a wide variety of forms in this current day that the schools now need to cater for that too, meaning the gender differences and all that sort of stuff, right? So, sorry. So now you have the introduction of this new curriculum, and we've seen the books, and there are things in these books that are being described and being, what would you call it? They're being displayed through animations and through images that go far and above and beyond what any sort of child or teenager would need to understand in regards to sex, and in regards to understanding the difference between what is normal, what is okay, what is reciprocal, what is not, what is legal, what is not, that sort of stuff. It goes into the kinks involved in sex, okay? The perversions, right? So because these things, some of the things that are described in it are so extreme that they are miles away from the norm, so they are perversions of the norm, right? Whatever your relationship is with that word, off you go, but they are perversions. They're talking about defecating on people. They're talking about that sort of stuff. Explain to me why a child has any need to know that. And the argument then from Norma Foley is that children they have access to this stuff already via their mobile phones. Therefore, adults should talk to them more about that. Bizarre thinking. Bizarre. Like, children have access to a multitude of things on their phones that adults have absolutely no business talking to them about. And that does not justify kind of post hoc justification of why adults should insert themselves into this conversation or into a conversation with children about certain topics, right? So let's talk about that. So what is the dynamic at play there? So if you have an adult, and if anyone is aware, or if anybody knows anybody that has been to college or is in college to be training to earn their degree or masters or whatever the case is to become a teacher, you'd be aware of the emphasis of a particular political ideology in the classroom, and in terms of earning your marks and earning your degree overall, right? So you'd be docked marks if you stay away from the diversity stuff. You know, in order to get good marks, you need to include all of these things, right? So you're rewarded for being politically affiliated as a teacher, as a practicing and training teacher, and that goes one way. Okay, from what I've seen, what I've spoken to with people about, this leans one way, and that should be no surprise, right? And you see the result of that in this sort of curriculum that's introduced, right? And in the teachers that this country is producing to a large degree, and in the children that these schools are now producing and these colleges are producing, right? And that's the whole idea, and that is to take what's going on in the colleges over the last couple of decades and replicate that in secondary schools and in primary schools. So the whole state body of education in this country is just aimed politically one way. That's a nightmare. That is an absolute nightmare. And it'll take a long, long while to rinse that out of people again, right? So, but anyway, you now have the adult, the indoctrinated adult in the classroom speaking to children about sex, about different acts that people can get involved in, all that sort of stuff, kinks, role play, masks, all that nonsense, right? Stuff that should be kept private, totally kept private. But now you have a situation where you have adults sitting down speaking to children about this. And because the indoctrination is, by its nature, aimed in one direction, or it has a certain flavour to it, that teaching is going to be given through a particular lens, and children are going to soak that stuff up because of how it's presented to them, right? So almost automatically or indirectly, children are being conditioned around a perfectly natural physical act between people, into the world of BDSM and all that nonsense, all that sort of stuff that children's minds have no business knowing about, right? regardless of what access they have to it on their phone. They have no business knowing about that stuff. Neither do adults, to be honest with you, right? But what is being normalized in that situation then? And you can sell me the idea that it's positive for children to speak about this stuff so they'll be able to understand it and be able to recognize it and not fall prey to it should it be presented to them by a predator, right? Sounds good on paper, but there's a price to pay for that if that is indeed what will result from that, you know, because that hasn't been justified to me to any acceptable level. So, but what is being normalized, because two things can come of that. You might get totally aware children that are like, that was a great talk, and I'm glad I understood that stuff, and now I feel totally safe, right? Fine. But what is being normalized out of that is children learning that it is now acceptable for an adult to sit down and speak with you about perverted acts involving sex, involving probably multiple partners, involving, like I said, that sort of stuff. That's now being normalized. So you can have an adult with a little amphitheater around them of children who are listening to them talk about kinks, talk about their own sexual proclivities perhaps, and that is okay now, right? And it is also, it's morally positive to hold a specific view around this. It's not a neutral thing where it's like, look, people can engage in this, men and women, whatever you want, right? Just keep it neutral and keep it balanced. It's not that anymore. It's a political flavour and it's a political slice of a natural act that's been subverted and sold to children as normal. Okay? And you might say, well, look, don't parents have the ability, to take their children out of the class? Probably, yes. And should they have the ability to do so? Of course. But is there a price to pay for that? There is, of course. Two prices. Potential, anyway. One definite, the other potential, right? So the first one is that the child, just say you have 30 kids in a class and two of them have their parents come in and say, we don't want our kids to be part of that. You now have two kids that are standing outside, separated out from their class, right? So they're isolated out from their class, which means you're separating that distance based on the idea that you want to sit down and talk about certain acts with children. So there's a penalty, there's a price to pay for those kids, right? And kids don't want to be apart, they don't want to be socially isolated because it's painful for them, right? So they're going to put pressure on their parents maybe to go back into the class. I want to listen to it, I'm going to talk to the kids about it anyway, so therefore you might as well just put me back in, right? So you're kind of caught, like. And the other price for that then is the legal and the political one. So I think Irish people have dodged a bullet over this year, with the family referendum. Because I believe if we voted that in, anyone's ability, family would have been negated and probably erased out of the Constitution, which would have put the state as the primary caregiver and educator of the child. The buck would have stopped with the state as to how to morally encourage and grow the children of the state, right? Which means that if you disagreed with this stuff, you could have run the risk of having your children taken off you. So I think we've dodged an absolute missile with that, which is a positive thing, right? So where else am I going with this? Yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. But again, I suppose the main takeaway from this is that the argument that preparing children and sharing information with them will help them to make better decisions and help them to be safer in the world, it's hard to argue against that, right? But even if that is the case, and that is absolutely 100% proven, and it becomes proven and is totally legitimate that is the outcome of rolling out this new curriculum, the fallout from that is that children now come to believe that adults openly speaking to them about this stuff is now normal, which means there's no logical argument against children speaking to other adults about this, because they're going to deem it to be acceptable. The children will. Number one, because teachers aren't naturally like trustworthy adults that children have a trusting, nurturing relationship with. At least that's not how I've seen it with a lot of kids and teachers. They have a position, or they have a relationship with a teacher as student teacher. This teacher adult is in a position of authority, and they can dictate to me, give me work, and they decide what goes on in the classroom and what rules are adhered to, right? So the child learns that positions in authority, so those in control in the world, are now telling me that it's okay for adults to sit with underage people and speak to them about perverse sexual acts. That's going to be the lesson. Through osmosis, through just from the situation happening, that's what's going to happen. That's the lesson that's going to be embodied by the child. And also, if parents are allowing this, and if parents send their children into school and they're okay with that, and more importantly, if the child sees that their parent is okay with this, now what's going to be embodied, and the lesson taken away from that, is that my parents are okay with an adult talking to me about inserting objects into another person's body. So those are the takeaways. And to contextualize that, then, if you can look at this stuff in a vacuum and just kind of go, what is this madness about? Like, where is all this stuff coming from? We've fallen off in the last 20 years, and look, we used to be like this, and now we're talking about all this stuff, right? And creeps and perverts are everywhere, right? Yeah, that's the context we're in. Look around at the news stories. Look around at the amount of rings and stuff that are after been found in Ireland. Just Google it. The P word, rings. Off you go. Article after article after article after article. Talking about groups, families, networks. Not just in Ireland. And it's not just like an everyday person or a certain type of socio-economic blah 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 category that is involved in this stuff. Absolutely not. We can see now that I suppose the P. Diddy thing, the Jeffrey Epstein thing, what else is there? The Peter Nygard thing. Like, there's so many of these rings and stuff that go all the way up to royalty in England, all the way up to presidents in America. Right? Do you think this stuff, that man who owned that island, that plane landed in Ireland before? And he was also with Mary Robinson, no less, he was also at a party for gifted students. Okay, so secondary school students. Jeffrey Epstein and Mary Robinson and a few of Bono, of course, at these parties. Do you think this stuff doesn't spill onto the island of Ireland? And again, to bring it full circle, look what's coming out now with this report. That there's Drew Harris, all false and all, but Drew Harris is even coming out saying that they're going to have to be looking at whether there is whether the abuse involved in, or whether the abuse perpetrated in state institutions and schools, whether there was a network involved in that. Of course there was, but this is what we're looking at here. Okay, this is what we're looking at here. So it's no coincidence that those in power are pushing this narrative that it's okay for adults to be sitting down and talking this dirt with children, while also you have dominoes of people in positions of power who are getting busted for doing horrible things with children. Right? Connect the dots, and learn from it, and don't fall victim to it.